Hey there, creatives. I'm really excited to get back to podcasting. I took a long hiatus over the summer, which was much, much needed. Sometimes it is important to just pull away and stop some of the things that you're doing to give yourself some slow down time. And we're going to talk about that in this episode a little bit, that importance of taking breaks and allowing yourself that time to slow down because it really impacts your creativity. And I'm really excited to have my next guest on the show and to share a conversation with you. And today you're going to listen to a conversation I had with Jacob Nordby. He is a writer, speaker, and creativity researcher and guide. And he is the author of several books, one of which is called The Creative Cure. And we talk a little bit about that on the show. Um, I loved our conversation and the way he thinks about creative practices and really tapping into our own creative source to help us to regulate ourselves and to connect with our own guidance system, really, our own kind of wisdom and support that we all have within us. It's like it's all about resilience, really. So, without further ado, here's my conversation with Jacob Nordby.
The Creative Psychotherapist is the official podcast of the Creative Clinicians Corner, a practice-building resource for creative psychotherapists. TCP Podcast is the cast for creative, expressive, and experiential-focused psychotherapists curious to learn how to design, build, and scale a thriving private practice. Your host, Raina Lombardi, interviews successful therapists about the tools and strategies they have used to develop creative-focused practices. They also talk about the products, services, and side hustles they have developed, using their knowledge and creativity to enhance their therapy practices, make a greater impact in their communities, and diversify their income streams. Welcome. Now here's your host, Raina Lombardi.
Thanks so much for listening to the Creative Psychotherapist podcast. I'm your host, Raina Lombardi, and I'm really excited. This is going to be the first episode back after our summer break. And I'm really excited to bring on my next guest and welcome him to the show. His name is Jacob Nordby, and he is the author of The Divine Arsonist, Blessed Are the Weird, and The Creative Cure. He is a passionate researcher and teacher of creativity, healing, and the human potential. He's co-founder of the Institute for Creative Living Foundation, and a writing room community with Anne Lamont and others. He loves to invite others into lives of joy and healthy creative expression on all levels. And you can learn more about him at his website, www.jacob, JACOB, NORDBY.com. And I'll have more information on where you can learn more about him in the show notes, but we're going to find out a little more right now. So, welcome, Jacob. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Raina. I was chuckling when you were spelling out my name. Thank you for that. And my last name doesn't seem to be easy to spell, so
I think it's like the consonants, the two consonants, the D and the B together can kind of throw people off. So I want to make sure that people know where to go. And everybody spells their name so uniquely. I've met Jacobs, which the traditional Jacob is how you spell it, but I've seen it spelled other ways too. So, yeah.
well, I'm awfully glad to be here, Raina. Thank you for inviting me to be on your show.
I'm excited to talk to you, and I think probably the first question I really want to ask is what led you into becoming a researcher of creativity and having creativity be at the center of your work that you do?
Hmm. That is such a great question. Probably like many people in your audience, seeking to heal the pain in my life really led me toward digging into some really interesting um, rabbit holes of information. And, I grew up in a very restrictive kind of Christian fundamentalist cult environment. And then when I left that, there was a big hole left in me. And it wasn't until my mid 30s and late 30s that I began to realize that I kept bumping my head on what I now call the invisible furniture. So these old beliefs, these old survival strategies and coping mechanisms. And even though my life looked fine on the outside, I kept bumping my head and my shins, and discovering how limited I really was. And that wasn't something I was okay with. So it just led me into a lot of search.
I love that term, the invisible furniture, right? It's there, it's built, it's like a strong framework, and it's so strong that you're blind to it and you don't even notice that it's there, but you're like, why does this keep happening? And
Yeah, it's kind of like getting up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom and thinking we know where everything is, and then we keep bumping our head or shins on something. And later, when we turn the light on, we go, okay, well, we're going to fix that. But I think a lot of us tend to just keep bumping our heads and shins.
yeah, that's true. And so where did you start when you're like, okay, I'm going to explore this for myself? Where did you start with your creative process?
Hmm.
Was it always in writing? Because clearly you're an author and that's part of what you do. But were you exploring any other avenues of creativity as well?
Like a lot of people, as a child, I didn't know any better. So I drew and I sang and I played the violin. I did all these things that were, creative. As I began to become an adult, of course, I began to place economic value, or I'm never good enough at that. And so I began to just put those things away. And as I entered my mid 30s, Raina, I discovered that despite the fact that I had all of these external markers of success, this great big new office and a big house and all the things, I was not feeling at peace. I was not feeling satisfied. And it wasn't just that I wasn't making art, it was parts of me I weren't being lived, they weren't being fulfilled. And it wasn't until I had a pretty dramatic shakeup in 2008 9 that really turned my life upside down and caused me to, well, lose everything, all of those things, and start fresh. It didn't feel fresh, it felt scary. But I moved to Austin, Texas, and took a few part-time jobs just to pay the bills. And I was in this big warehouse, and I had all the time between fulfilling these box orders, and I began reading The Artist's Way. And um, yeah, and I started doing the exercises in there, Raina, and I would just sit there at this dusty desk with a notebook with tears running down my face. And I began to open up this deep well that I hadn't really acknowledged before. And it was that really began to open me up. And then I remembered my childhood dream of being a writer, and I started writing. And that's where I love your questions, because that's where I probably first began to notice the connection between healing and creativity. And I think a lot of people tend to put those in two different silos. I know you don't, you're an art therapist, but a lot of people tend to see them as different, right?
Mhm. Yeah, I also see it as an existential experience that the creative process is it's like an
Mm.
essential core of being human and our purpose here on the planet
Yeah,
is we're
yeah.
all here to create something, to express something that it's just built in our DNA. And if we look back, um, it, archaeologists, all the evidence there, right? Like just thousands and thousands of generations of humans finding ways to express themselves with whatever tools they had available. There's just something at our core that if we're not living a creative life and we're not um, connecting with that part that needs to be expressed, that we do feel like snuffed out, like our light is being snuffed out.
Yeah. I love that. And I love the that you brought up archaeology, because it takes us back to long before the industrial era, before we had big distribution systems and began trying to monetize everything. People were making art and singing together and making music and doing things artfully, that they never were worried about, am I going to become famous, will I make a living at this? It was just part of their natural human experience. So I love that you've made that connection.
Yeah, that their life has certainly changed with the way we live today and in modern times. But I think people that intentionally live creative lives recognize that, and they prioritize that space and time to allow for that creative way of living, whether it's,
Mm,
singing together, dancing, painting. And there's something really special about creating in community too.
yes, I couldn't agree more. And I just think that, um, well, I grew up in this church, and I mentioned that before. And despite the fact that it was very restrictive, it was community, Raina,
Mhm.
and we sang together, and that's where we played instruments, and that's where we did things. And so I feel like there's something really intrinsically important about what you just said. And I think that it's hard for us sometimes in our current culture to make space for it, you know?
Yeah, but because art is, it's intentionally slowing yourself down. If you're creating in some capacity, you have to slow down. Um,
Yes.
right. As a writer, right, I I don't know your process for writing, but I've read a lot about other people's process for writing,
Mhm.
and I know that it's like people find the time where they can have that space and time unobstructed, no interruptions, where they can just get into the flow and experience whatever it is of that material coming in and flowing through them. And it's a slowing down, but we don't live in a culture that prioritizes going slow.
No, we're told 25/8, hustle and grind. And one thing I want to also address though, Raina, because I have, as I mentioned before we got started today, I have a lot of therapists in my world. My mother is a therapist, and I have many therapists, and I love the conversations we have. And it seems, and I'd love to hear your perspective on this, it seems that just before, then during, and especially after COVID, there's become such an awareness of the need for mental health work. And I love that. And it just seems like a lot of therapists right now feel as if there's not a time between taking care of people to hardly go to the bathroom, much less slow down and do something artful.
Oh, I think that really speaks to the systemic issues that we have within not just mental health, but healthcare in general.
Mm,
Um, if you look at the requirements of doctors that are paneled with insurance, the numbers that they have to meet per day, and if a therapist is working in an agency setting, there
mhm,
are certain quotas or billables or productivity standards that they're expected to make. And in order to make
mm,
them, right, we know people have life events, they cancel or they forget or they have
yeah.
to reschedule for whatever reason. So they'll book people for 8 hours a day of therapy. And therapy itself definitely is a slowed down process. You are in the presence of another person. You're all of your attention, you're really attuning to that other human, what is going on for them. You're observing everything that they're doing with their body, what they're saying. You're you're responding to them in a way where it really is communicating that you're listening and understanding deeply. That's a tremendous amount of energy output. And for people to do that for 8 hours straight a day, right? Then you're like, oh my gosh, like I want somebody to cancel because I can't do the 8 hours, that
Yes.
it it speaks to this larger issue of that hustle culture, but also kind of how we structure our healthcare um, in today's society. If you're working in private practice, maybe you have a little more flexibility and you don't have to do that. Um, so,
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny you say that. My mother is in her 70s and she didn't become a therapist until she was after 60 years old. So that was really a big move for her.
wow,
And
that's
she's
awesome.
extraordinary. I know. I'm so inspired by her. If I ever feel tired or worn out, I'm like, yeah, that's also I need my mom is some but she does that. She'll do 8 sessions in a day, Raina, and I do individual work with people. I'm not a therapist, but even that work that I do, which is, similar in that it's holding space and being very present, when I'm done with a 60 or 90-minute session, I've told my mother and other therapists, I just don't know how you take a breath, clear, metabolize what just happened, and then go back in and do it again immediately. It's just remarkable.
Yeah, I think, I've been working as a therapist for close to 20 years. And I will say that early on in my career, I would often feel so depleted and zonked. By the end of the day, I would come home and I'm not a nap person, but I would need to take a nap. I would need extra sleep. It felt really depleting. And then after being in the field longer, I think you find little ways to adapt, to cope, to build in time
Mm,
and space. Um,
yeah.
Fortunately, in my work as an art therapist, sometimes I get to make a little bit of art while I'm with my client,
Mm,
and that is nice too. It's not so much me focused. I'm creating, but I'm still paying attention to the client. But it's still, I don't know. It allows a little more, I guess, space. I'm at a loss for words to describe what it does, but it helps.
mm,
It
mm,
helps.
mm. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I love that. I'm one of the things that I seek to do is rather than give people some sort of prescription of you need to make an hour a day for whatever it is, to reconnect with your inner creative self. And by the way, I want to make that distinction. I think that a lot of times we get wound up in the idea of a creative practice of some kind that means we're pursuing some particular art form. For example, I'm going to write for an hour a day. I'll work with a lot of writers. And um, one thing I like to help people understand is that creativity is not some substance or force outside of yourself. It is your intrinsic spark. It's your spark of life, and it's meant to flow through all of your life. And so, a creative practice, as I see it, the first and most important one is reconnecting with that inner self
mm,
and listening to ourselves and asking, what do I need? And so that sending that signal to our deep psyche that I matter, that this time matters, that I deserve a little bit of space, but also developing that as a micro practice. So it doesn't have to be an hour, 5 or 10 minutes a day of intentionally sitting down. I'd usually do it first thing in the morning. Julia Cameron would approve, but I talk to Julia and I do classes with her pretty frequently. And it's funny, people will always ask, does it have to be in the morning? Of course, her answer is yes. And then I'll privately say, and it's more important that you do it. Even if it's 10 o'clock. I mean, I did my morning pages last night in bed at 9:30. So, I mean, but even 5 minutes, Raina, and I think that comes to a lot of people as a great relief to go, oh, I felt like such a failure because I never have an hour unbroken. And single mothers, I was a single
oh
dad for 10
yeah.
years. I mean, there's not time to breathe between things, and it's legitimate. It's not an excuse. And so I'm like, hey, what if you can give yourself just 5 minutes?
Mhm.
And then maybe it turns into 10, but don't even worry about an hour. And I watch people light up and go, I can do that. I can make that promise to myself. The hour is just, I can't promise that. And
Mhm.
when I try to do it, I get a streak of 2 days and then something happens and then I fail and I fall off the horse. And I'm like, great, let's do 5 minutes or even two, honestly. Let's start somewhere.
Yeah, I feel like I'll be honest, I wish that I was consistent like that and I did it every day. I'm not. There will be streaks where every morning I do some kind of art journaling or
Mhm.
expressive writing or something. And then there will be months where it doesn't happen just because, well, there's other things going on and that becomes not like what my needs are different during that time. And it's about listening to what your needs are.
Yes.
Um, Earlier this year, I had a good start to the year. Then it was like, boosh, the world just got really intense. Moved my office. Along with moving my office, there was like all of these other external things that happened.
Mm.
And you know what? Getting up in the morning to work out and to do the expressive practice, that was not what was a priority, but sleep was,
Yes.
and getting that extra sleep was. So, if you lose track of it, like it's okay. You can start again when you feel called to.
Yes. Yes. I couldn't agree more. I think a lot of people I heard a trainer one time use the phrase die of shame. And because they didn't do it perfectly, they didn't do it every day or enough, then they just go, well, I guess I'm just not one of those people, or I'm lazy, or I'm a slob, or whatever it is. And
Mhm.
I like to just get that out of the way altogether. It's like you're you and your parts are welcome here, however you show up today. Uh, I work with groups, and that's one thing is like, I didn't feel like coming today because I haven't done it for a week and I didn't all these things. And I'm like, I'm just glad you showed up today. Let's start there,
Yeah, right. That's what matters, that present moment.
Yeah,
Um, Not what you did yesterday. What can we do right now? You're here right
yeah,
now.
yeah. I
Yeah.
would love to talk a little bit about a very simple journaling practice if this feels like a good place for it.
Yeah, let's do it.
Well, you said a few minutes ago, you said, tuning in with what I need, what I'm feeling, that sort of thing. And I lit up a bit because that's at the core of this creative journaling practice I have. And this was born from my own experience of really working journaling for years and years, Raina, but then also realizing how many people felt somewhat estranged from the experience of it, or they would feel like my journaling, even when I use a practice such as morning pages from the artist's way, it ends up sounding like boring, whiny, barfy drivel, and it's just day after day of nothing but the same thing, and it just doesn't feel good to keep doing that. And I'm like, obviously there's some benefit in boring, whiny, barfy drivel, but so over time I developed this practice for myself of asking three questions because I grew up with a lot of childhood trauma. I found that hypervigilance and anxiety were constant parts of my life. I found myself often feeling guilty when I would make a little time for myself. And so what I developed was a practice that has three questions. And the first one is, how do I feel right now? And that one by itself, again, and you're a therapist, many of us got the message early and internalized the message that what I feel doesn't matter.
Oh,
And our
totally.
society is full of messages like F your feelings and things like that,
Hmm.
right? And so we're taught from an early age, what you feel doesn't matter. You can't trust your feelings. Feelings always lie, all of those things. And so by asking the question, how do I feel right now? And sometimes that can be existential or emotional. Sometimes it's just I'm feeling tired this morning. I'm feeling anxious today, whatever it might be. Or I'm feeling this morning is a beautiful day. We had a bunch of rain and it's clear and bright outside. And I was sitting on the patio of a coffee shop journaling. I'm like, I'm feeling wonderful today. Sometimes it ends up being that way.
Yeah.
But so how do I feel right now? That by itself sends that message to the inner creative self. Somebody's listening, somebody's paying attention. And then the second question is, what do I need right now? Similar to the first question, a lot of us are taught early on that our needs don't matter. I was the oldest of 6 kids, and um, everything just was a hurry in our life, and by necessity, we were making food and washing dishes together and doing all the things. But it got to be an early message that I internalized. My needs really are less important than everyone else's around me, and so asking that question of ourselves, what do I need right now? And sometimes it's very prosaic. I need a nap. I need to pee.
Hmm.
I need a drink.
And what would be the third one?
Well, I wanted to pause there, not just keep rattling on in a monologue, but yeah, and that needs part, like um I love sending that signal that says my needs matter. I'm going to pay attention to them. And I've come to see the inner creative self as a very intelligent, curious toddler in a certain way. It's
Mm.
open, it's taking in information, it doesn't know all the rules for things. But like a toddler, I have 3 children, and when they were toddlers, if I ignored them, Raina, daddy, I need a drink. Okay, just a minute. Daddy, I need a drink. Just a minute. About the fourth or fifth time, if I didn't pay attention, something was going to break. They were going to get my attention.
Oh, yeah.
So when I would turn and look at my beloved child and say, "Oh, honey, what do you need?" "I need a drink. I've said it 17 times." "Okay, let's get a drink." The minute I paid attention to them, they settled right down. They were no longer breaking things. And so I found that if we treat our inner creative selves in the same way as an intelligent, curious, and very vocal toddler at a certain point, that helps us then frame it to go, I don't have to walk around with these feelings of angst and urgency all the time. I can actually spend a little time and find out what's needed. And often it's something very simple.
Mm. Love that. It's a great metaphor. And yeah, I think when we're not creating, it it's mad. It's mad.
Well,
And
yeah,
it's having a tantrum. Or at least for me. I'll speak for me.
raise my hand too. And the other thing that I think this points to, Raina, is what is one of my great motivations, which is to help people no longer put creativity outside of life. It's not like, well, that's my creative self, and then this is the rest of my life. No, your life is a creation. In fact, that's one of the processes here, right? I see you nodding. I love inviting people into the understanding that creativity is an energy that's meant to flow through every part of my life, much like the sap in a tree or the blood in our veins. And that means that any part that is not filled with our creative selves will wither up. And if we pay attention, our creative selves want to flow back into that area of life and make it artful, whether it's my relationships or the work I do for pay, or my more classically creative type things, or the walk I need to take by the river. Any of these can be an artful part and an artful expression of our lives.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I was nodding the whole time. I truly believe that it is it's just a natural part of living that as natural as breathing.
Yeah.
And I think it helps us so much when we are able to embrace it
Hmm.
and we're able to nurture it and we're able to celebrate it and have fun with it and allow it to be a mess, allow it to be ugly, allow it to allow it to not meet certain standards that would um, generate income. um,
Yes.
that the creative process, I think, can get really sticky if we're using our creativity for our income. That can create
Yes.
some challenges.
Yeah.
um, and we have to make time to just create, just to experiment, have fun, to play, for it to create for creativity's sake, for our own childlike self, to have that exploration. And what you said about walking down by the river and having an artful experience that way, I think it isn't just the act itself.
Yeah.
There's the research, there's the sensing, there's
Mhm.
collecting all of this inspirational information, which we're then synthesizing, and then that becomes the creative output. But gathering, collecting all of that information, that's part of the creative process too. But
Yes.
people don't talk about that much.
We almost never talk about it. In fact, what we judge ourselves by are the finished creations of others that took, months or years or whatever it took to make these things happen. We didn't see the mess. We didn't see the meandering and the boredom and the despair and all the things that go into or can, and yeah, one thing I love is the polyvagal chart. Obviously, you're familiar with that, and I have it tattooed inside of my forehead virtually, so that I remember this, Raina, because when you look at the ventral vagal, what I call the green zone or the creative zone, that's kind of the holy grail for most spiritual traditions and
Mhm.
therapy and most self-help or meditation. Like if you get into the green zone, physiologically, everything is going to be more supportive. Immune system increases, sense of connection to others and resourcefulness, all the good things happen in that zone. But most of us are living up way up on this scale, somewhere higher and higher in fight or flight, and many of us tip over into freeze at some point. And so one thing I like to help people realize is that meditation is wonderful and I use it. Journaling is wonderful and I use it. But honestly, understanding that the green zone, that ventral vagal state, can be reached if we're willing to make a little time for it with a few minutes gentle walk. It doesn't have to be an athletic walk, a bath, a cup of tea, sitting and talking with a trusted friend or a partner. These things, if we understand the intention behind it and the reason it feels good, sometimes that helps people quit having anxiety about not meditating enough or not journaling enough or whatever. It's like, no, I know how to get into that state, and there are many, many different ways of getting there.
I love that. Um, yeah, so getting into the flow when
Hmm.
everything is just synergistic,
Yeah.
it's easy, right? You're like, oh, wow, all the creativity is flowing out of me. Oh, everything's working out. Doesn't feel
Well,
like a fight.
about 7 or 8 years ago, before I really dove into the understanding for myself, and then was so fascinated by trauma research that I really began to dig into that more, I visited a holistic Asian medical practitioner, and she asked me if I knew what active resting was. And I was dealing with a lot of chronic fatigue and some depression and all these things. And I went to her saying, I need help. My energy was really low. And she asked if I knew what active resting was. And I kind of laughed. I said, well, I've heard the term, but I don't think I know what it means. She said, well, that's kind of obvious. And she helped me understand the simple mindset shift. She said, because I told her, I said, honestly, I feel like I'm lazier now than I've ever been. I feel like I have to take all this time because I just don't have any energy. And she said, well, what if when you crawl in bed and pull the blackout shades and put your laptop on your lap and start watching Netflix, what if you make the shift in mentally that says, I am actively resting. That means she said, I want you to imagine that you're plugging your iPhone into the wall charger and watching it go from 1% red into the green. She said, if you're anxious about what you're doing, you're actually not letting yourself recharge. You are telling yourself a story that's keeping you elevated in anxiety, which means you're actually not getting the rest you genuinely need. And it was so funny, Raina, that began to help me. And it's taken me years, and I still have to work on myself with that. But that visual, sometimes even what we might call self-indulgent activities, if we understand that, using the journaling questions, I said, what do I need? It's like, I need deep rest. Okay, maybe
Mhm.
I need a day. I'm an introvert. Maybe I need a day without a lot of social contact and just in my pajamas in my house. And it was hard for me to give myself permission for that for a lot of years.
I think that is a hard thing for many adults to give themselves permission to do, right? It's drilled
Yeah,
into us that we need to be responsible, we need to be productive, um,
yeah.
all of those things. And we don't often take that. I do think, though, we're seeing a, a pivot in awareness about
Mhm.
that. And people are changing the way they're living and working, which is really exciting to see because they're
Yes.
prioritizing what you're talking about, that active rest, and they're prioritizing the way that they live and
Mm,
work, right? Creating that balance, that it's not all one or the other.
yeah.
Because,
Yeah. I'm so glad you brought attention to that. That was one of the things that, as COVID set in and we had this massive disruption, I, of course, was sorry that we were dealing with so much distress, but also it felt like a chance for us to pay attention to our needs in a different way than has been possible or maybe even legitimate in the last 40 or 50 or maybe more years.
yeah, absolutely. And I hope that it continues. Um, yeah,
Yeah, I think that the industrial era, and by the way, I've said that a couple of times. I think that humankind has been developing these things all of the down through our story, our history. And so it's not as if we haven't gained a lot of benefits from the developments of the industrial age. And I feel like what we're in right now is a time where we're asked to genuinely take the power back from the machine world that we've created, because it was meant to make our lives easier, not more frantic and anxious. But
right.
the fact is, we just keep creating out of a fear of scarcity. And I feel like we're in a time where if we are willing to, we can step into a different kind of promise of what is possible, which means genuine freedom and genuine, which also, I think one of the
Mm.
reasons we don't take advantage of that, Raina, is because we are so afraid of boredom. Like, if I don't have productive work to fill my life, um, what will I do with that time? And Cal Newport, who wrote Deep Work, and other researchers talk about the crucial importance of boredom. In fact, I talk about it in the Creative Cure some, but understanding that boredom is a necessary state and there's a brainwave state associated with it. And we honestly can't tap our deeper creative gifts or feelings unless we're willing to allow some time that's not filled with productive activity.
Yeah, we need those breaks. I know I've read a lot of, like, about different inventors, right? That was like
Hmm.
part of their strategy.
Yeah,
Um, that they would have intentional breaks to
yeah,
go do nothing.
yeah, totally. And understanding that especially I'm in a period right now where I've been developing this big retreat with Anne Lamott and Julia Cameron, all these. And so that's requiring a lot. And we're developing a whole writing community around it. So it feels like every day is filled with exciting and really intense work. And so I was sitting there journaling this morning and I watched myself, Raina, like a squirrel. I'm journaling a few words and then I'm picking my phone to check, and there's a message coming in and there's an email, and I'm journaling for a few. And finally I wrote in my journal, I am a mess today. I can't seem to focus.
I can relate. I can totally relate. I'm starting to teach a new class, or new to me class, tonight, and I've never taught it before. And
Ooh,
so yeah,
what's the
so
class on,
this
if I may ask?
art therapy assessments.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah, and so last night I was like, okay, it's like, what time? Oh, it's 2:30. Oh, it's 3. Like, I gotta get some sleep. I gotta get some sleep today. Yeah,
2:30
so
a.m. Is that what you meant?
yes, like 2:38. Like, I was waking myself up because
Yeah.
my brain
Yeah.
is like rehearsed, like actively, like mentally rehearsing and
Hmm.
going through all of the things that I want to make sure that I hit and talk about. And I'm like, no, it's not time for that. We can go over that tomorrow. Get some sleep. But no, I've been up since like 5.
Oh my God. I hope you get a little rest.
I will, after we're done talking. I'm gonna do some meditation myself, and an energy meditation.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Yeah, but it it happens where I was like, okay, I'm really frazzled this morning. I felt really frazzled,
Hmm.
and had to, like, tell myself, be really intentional about how I was talking to myself. Like,
Yeah.
it's gonna be okay. Nothing to frazzle about.
Oh, well, it will be. And I also understand, the need to be responsible and show up well prepared and deliver on the promise of a class. Those are important too. And so it's a lot.
Yeah, yeah. So whenever I think you're developing something new, it can feel that way where you're like, okay, I had everything organized in my mind, and now it all just whoosh, everything got jumbled up. Um, but
Oh my God, I can relate to that. In fact, I remember sitting down in front of my laptop a few years ago before a big event we were putting on, and I just was feeling completely terrified, even though I'd had a great flow of ideas ahead of that. And then I'm sitting down 5 minutes before it's time for me to go on stage and just trying to make sure I'd remembered everything that was important. And I felt my inner guidance go, "Hey, you've prepared so much. It's all in there. In fact, the
mm,
PowerPoint slides and the notes you're making, these are all to really take care of that ego part of your mind, which is, by the way, I don't use the ego as a bad word. This is taking care of that part of your mind that wants to show up and wants to be seen as prepared. And that's totally fine. But you can trust that it's all in there. It'll all come out. And it did.
mhm. Yeah, that's awesome. So I want to make sure we double back because I think we only got the two questions, and there were three. One was, how do I feel right now? The other one was, what do I need right now? And what would be the third journal prompt?
You are so good because I've realized that we missed that question too. Thanks for coming back. So the third one, and the order of these has become important to me, because how do I feel? What do I need? A lot of times we try to jump right into visualizing a desired state of mind or a desired, creation or something without paying attention to the first two things. A lot of times we're trying to it's almost like people who want to get to self-acceptance, but don't do the inner work of self-discovery or the needed healing and the things they're trying to get to. I am a strong, confident human or whatever. And they wonder why they always feel like a fraud with that. And so this third question, I really invite people to put it last, because I find that moving into this third question is best when I have prepared the ground by settling myself a bit. The third question is, what would I love? And often when I'm in the middle of emotional turmoil or stress, sometimes I've reframed that question, Raina, as how would I love to feel right now? Sometimes putting a goal or I'm trying to visualize this thing, this accomplishment that I'm going toward. Sometimes that can feel way too far out in the future, especially when someone's going through, turmoil or destabilization of some kind. So coming right into the present, how would I love to feel right now? And a lot of times for me, that ends up being, I'm getting ready to go into this meeting or I'm getting ready to go on Raina's podcast. I would love to feel confident. I would love to feel open and friendly. Or I'd love to feel less anxious, whatever it is. Sometimes that next step on the path helps me not try to focus on something way down the road and just go, oh, I would love to feel this way right now. Or if I'm going into a tough conversation with, one of my business partners or supplier or something, it helps if I get myself centered just that little bit. But then for longer range things, what would I love? And this is where the creative self loves to dream. And if I give it a few paragraphs to dream, and sometimes I'll start that out with a prompt like, I'm so happy and grateful now that, and put myself in a future situation and let myself create the story. It's
Mhm.
remarkable sometimes looking at, if I look back at a journal entry from 2 or 3 years ago and look at something I'd written down, I would love to, I'm so happy and grateful now that, and to look back and without any real like dedicated daily focus on that, just realize that came to be. That's
Mhm.
amazing. In fact, I
Love
had a
that.
conversation with Dr. James Doty yesterday, and he wrote Into the Magic Shop, and he has a new book coming out next May about manifestation. And he's a neurosurgeon, he's a scientist, he's like this really deep researcher in the brain and how it all works. And we were talking about manifestation, and he's an outspoken atheist. He's not into all the, more spiritually things that I'm very familiar and comfortable with. But I love that because he's taking it from a very strong standpoint like that. But that's one of the things that he really teaches and in his work and has observed, is that we have so much power to create the lives that we would love to live, and often we stay back from even imagining it because we feel so afraid or inadequate.
Right. Well, it's like, well, I don't. if I imagine it, there's like a
Mhm.
fear. If I imagine it and it doesn't happen, then I'm like grieving
Yes.
this thing that didn't come to be. Or like, some people have the
Mm,
perspective like, I know that's not even possible. So why am I going to even allow myself to
yes.
entertain that idea? Um,
Mhm.
which, that hurts my heart,
Yeah.
because if you're not going to allow yourself to dream bigger, to
Mhm.
just allow yourself to imagine all the things that are possible,
Yeah.
we stay so stuck in our own little space. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Completely. No, I got excited. Didn't want to interrupt you. That points to me, it's interesting, Raina, when I was reading Body Keeps the Score 6 or 7 years ago, and then The Deepest Well, I began to notice that I myself, even though I've been, I'm left-handed, I'm right brain, I tend to have a lot more access to that kind of experience. I would discover that when I would sit down and try to imagine an outcome or an experience that I would really love, I noticed how hard it was for me. And then I began pulling the thread on that. And I began to realize that much like our needs and our feelings, we get taught at an early age, sometimes explicitly, that's just your imagination. Stop daydreaming. And we actually get
Yes.
tuned to train the most powerful and the first step in the creative formula, as I've identified it. Imagination is always the first step, but we never lose our imagination. What happens is we get trained to use it to paint scenes of what we don't want: failure, pain, rejection, disappointment, and so we are, most people, if you, I'm sure as a therapist, if you ask somebody to imagine something they don't want, my God, they can create a Steven Spielberg movie in a second.
Oh my gosh, it's so true. It's
Yeah.
so true. And I think that that happens to our young people, right, in school. Like, teachers don't even allow people to doodle as they're like listening and paying attention. Like, what's so wrong with doodling while people are paying attention? Um, but
Mm,
we learn that that skill is not valued. What is valued in society is rote memorization, conformity,
yeah.
and following those expectations of those in leadership without question. And that's problematic on many different levels,
Yes.
aside from squashing our creative juices.
Yes.
Um,
Yes. I have a friend, Dr. Chris Niebauer, and he's a neuropsychologist. And we were talking as I was writing The Creative Cure. We were talking because he's all into left brain, right brain, all these things, just fascinating character. Um, but I got excited. I said, Chris, it sounds like what you're telling me is in our society, we've placed all the rewards and the focus on left brain activities, which is reflecting what you just said, Reina. And it's almost as if we've told a bodybuilder, never work out the right side muscles on your body, only the left, and you need to work them hard and you need to make them big and strong. And then after 30 years, we wonder why that same person has no functional, like they can't hardly walk down the road. They're out of balance. And he started
right.
laughing. He said, I would have never thought of that metaphor, but that's actually exactly what's happening. And he said, it's not that anyone is really all left brain or right brain. He said, actually, we've just been so trained, even those of us who are more easily um, right brain experiencers, we are also trained, like you just said, to create linear goal oriented behaviors. And so it takes some time. It can feel awkward and sometimes even painful to let ourselves get a little looser and learn that I don't even want to make people feel like they have to get more creative. I would love to be inside of them.
It's frustrating that that the creative process isn't as valued, because what we know is that it's essential in all workforces. If we allow people and encourage people's creative process, I mean, we start to solve
Yeah,
solutions for problems
yeah,
that have existed for a really long time and become more efficient. And There's just so many positives that come with creativity. In your book, what do you share with readers about the link between the curative factors of the creative process for their own healing and well-being?
Mm. Can you say that one more time? I was listening to the question and I wanted to make sure I'm really clear on what you're asking there.
Yeah, so your book is called The Creative Cure.
Hmm.
And so I'm curious what in your book you highlight are the curative factors
Mm.
from the creative process for our healing and wellness and, ultimate benefit.
Yeah. It's interesting. A lot of this started for me, at least in terms of this book, Raina, when I saw the World Economic Forum update back in, I think it was 2015 or so. And they do this every 5 years where they do a massive study and they come back with all this data that says these are the kinds of skills you need to survive and thrive in a career. All right. So this is money, this is big data. But it was interesting to see that the previous one that they had published, creativity was at the bottom of the top 10 list. And then in this new one that they had set up for 2020 and beyond, creativity had moved to number 3 on the list. But what was else was interesting is that some other what they call softer skills, such as empathy, were now on the list for the very first time. So that set off a light bulb for me. And I did a study with 10,000 people. And of those who responded, I asked, what's your greatest creative challenge? And then I had a multiple choice. And then there was also a box they could say other and explain. 72.3% of those who responded said, I doubt my talents and abilities. I don't think I'm good enough.
Oh,
Which
that's
point,
awful.
right? And I had a hard time believing it. And then as I engaged with that group who responded and we started doing some work together, I found that it really reflected a deep inner belief that I'm not good enough. I'm not
Mhm,
good enough. So to me, that began to help me realize it's not even a matter of the creative activity they don't think that's good enough or that they could become skillful enough in. There's a deeper hidden belief that I myself am not good enough. And so that was one. And then, of course, some others that came up were I think I have things that are worth sharing, but I don't think other people will value them. There was a lot that came back to self worth. And so that began and helped me continue the process of asking that question of, okay, this is a big clue because the business world, the economic world is understanding that we need creativity. People are beginning to talk about it a lot, but when it comes right down to doing it, a lot of people, or being it is how I'd prefer it, not just doing it. Because to me, creativity is, well, one of the simple definitions of it, Raina, is the process by which something rare, original, and valuable is formed.
mhm,
And one thing I love to help people understand is that as we heal the connection to our creative inner selves, we begin to realize that I myself, you yourself, everyone, we are our own most exciting and challenging and magnificent creative projects. If we focus first on the inner self, everything that begins to come from that is an expression of that rare, original, valuable being that each of us is. And so I begin to then approach my writing or the creativity I take in business or whatever it is, I begin to take a different approach with it in that it's no longer a test of whether I'm good enough or not. I'm doing that work internally. And
mhm.
so it gives me more of a chance to take risks and to not be good at something. And so, as I think this is a long way around of answering your question, but the subtitle of the book is How Finding and Freeing Your Inner Artist Can Heal Your Life. And I watch so many people,
Mm,
whenever they use the word creativity, their face kind of puckers up. They're like, well, that's for those creative people. And it hurts my heart because I'm like, it's genuinely here for everyone. There is no
mhm.
creative class out there. and everyone else just has to be these peasants working around in mundane experiences. Like, creativity is genuinely meant to come out of us, and if we heal that connection, we begin to bring more joy into our lives. And if I bring joy and artfulness to what's within my own arm's reach, how am I remember feeling so overwhelmed by the world, Raina, and realizing that I can't overcome the forces of stupidity and evil and cruelty and all the
Mhm.
things that are so distressing for me out there. I can't overcome those forces. What I can do something about is, how are my children doing in our home? How am I doing inside of myself? How is my partner doing? How are the friends in my life who might get more and more isolated? How are they doing? How can I touch and bring artfulness and love into what's within my own arm's reach? And I found that as I did that, it began to more and more reduce my sense of anxiety and overwhelm in the world. That's not denying the
Mhm.
forces that are distressing out there, but it's saying I can do something about this right here. And that brought and continues to bring more and more sanity into my life. And that's what I share with others. Let's bring more joy and sanity into our lives, more connection. One writer and researcher wrote, "We don't heal in isolation; we heal in community." And so
Mhm.
I invite people into creative community and into joyful community. I'm like, take the word creativity out if you need. Let's have fun together. Let's actually have fun together, you know?
I love that. Creating can be such a joyful experience and fun if we allow it to be.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that's
How can I
beautiful.
how can I make this thing right in front of me artful? So if I show up to have a conversation with you and I'm concerned about, how do I appear? How am I going to sound? And I'm mechanical about it. Let's serve the agenda of making sure everyone knows about this book. To me, that's no longer artful. If I show up and go, I'm interested in Raina and the work that you do out there. And yes, I want to talk about these things and get excited about them. But if this right here, if I'm thinking
Mhm.
about the next 5 things I have to do today, I'm going to lose the artfulness of this experience. And this feels artful because I'm connecting with you as an actual person and listening to
Yeah,
you.
I totally agree. It's creativity teaches us so much about presence and mindfulness and
Yeah.
living in the present moment, focusing on this one thing that we're doing right now. And that's a gift. That's a relief, you know? It's a
Yes.
relief from like when things feel overwhelming and jumbled and anxious, to be able to just be in the present moment, fully engrossed in whatever it is that activity is that you're engaging in, whether it is a conversation like this, or painting, or your writing, or movement, whatever it may be.
Making
Uh,
dinner.
Making dinner. Yes, I love cooking. That's one of my uh, places where I like to get creative and express myself, and
Yeah.
definitely get in the flow. I can lose like 10 hours in the kitchen easily. Go, oh my gosh, my feet hurt. Well, yeah, you've been standing making stuff for 10 hours.
Well, and I love to say, Raina, that I loved what you just said. When you lose yourself, you're cooking. This is artful. I don't really care about the words. I do care about the experience. And so
Mm,
what I love for people to allow themselves to do is reframe it to go, anything in which I feel more alive, whether it's a conversation, or my sister's a CFO working on a spreadsheet. She loves numbers. It actually makes her feel alive. Right? She goes into a flow state with it. Um, it doesn't really matter what it is so long as it's not harmful to others. Whatever it is that makes you feel truly alive, that is an expression of your creative self. That is art. That is
mm,
actual art, you know.
I love that. That's such a great quote. Anything in which I feel more alive is an expression of my creativity,
Yeah.
creative self. That's
You mind if I
beautiful.
read a small passage from this? I don't know if you've ever seen this book, Belonging by Toko Pa Turner.
I haven't, but yes, please do.
It's beautiful. She's a Jungian dream worker. She does a lot of really beautiful work. And this book, if you looked at it, it is full of underlines and dog ears and my tears and everything else. But I share this often in my classes and workshops. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but she says, I believe we have more than enough creativity to solve the problems of our times, but we have to make a perilous trek into the wilderness within to reclaim it. She says, few make the trek into this creative wild because the path requires great vulnerability.
Mhm.
To come into our true originality, we must surrender the layers of numbness we use to protect our hearts.
Oh, I have the goosebumps.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
beautiful,
yeah.
beautiful, and so true, right? I can
Well,
think of that disconnection, right?
yes,
How people disconnect and go numb
yeah,
instead of going in.
yeah. Well, and Raina, this is one reason I just love when I got the invitation to show up here, and then knowing what you're doing with working with so many people who are working with others out there. I just really want to honor everyone who is in the trenches of inviting people into surrendering, even if it's for an hour every 2 weeks, that they come into a therapist office and they, for a moment, are able to be vulnerable, to put down those layers of numbness, even if it's just for a few minutes. You're doing the work. You're helping provide the medicine that this world needs. And I am so firmly convicted that what she says is true, that a lot of the work that's needed right now is really not mechanical. It's not, we don't need better technology. We don't need faster cars. We really need to come deeply into our true originality, you know?
Mm, I I agree. Beautifully said, and thank you for sharing that passage. And now I wrote the book down. I'm going to have to put that on my list.
So beautiful.
Um, really great. Well, if people wanted to learn more about your work, the writing retreat that you're creating, and your book, The Creative Cure, where can people find more information about you, Jacob?
Well, like a lot of people who get a lot of projects going, maybe you can relate, Raina. I have websites here and there and everywhere. So you mentioned at the beginning of the show, jacobnorby.com. That's a great place to go. And I have this journaling practice that I mentioned earlier. It's a program. It's a downloadable ebook and also an audio version. I also have a little instruction video, like 3 minutes long, and I have a creative visualization that are included, and it's all free. And they can find that at creativeselfjournal.com.
Okay.
That's a great play, and it's again, it's free. I love when I created this years ago. I shared it with some therapist friends and just said, I don't know if this is any good. It's a 12-page ebook. I don't know if it's any good. And a couple of them came back, and then more and more have come back and said, oh my God, I'm sharing this with my clients because I've been wanting them to journal for years, and many of them just won't do it. They said for whatever reason, this practice is really helping them do it. So that makes me happy. The other one is creativecurebook.com is where you can go and sample. There's an audio sample, and that's where I talk about the three enemies of creativity, which is um, uh, traumatic experiences and conformity. Wow, my own three are escaping me now. Yeah, trauma and the fear of rejection, and then socialization, essentially. But we talk about there on that page, and there's downloadable samples and things. A writing room retreat is coming up this year in Santa Fe. We're also streaming it worldwide. So people can show up in Santa Fe if they can make the trip, but a lot of people can't. So we have, well over 1,000 people already registered to join us from worldwide, and that can be found at awritingroom.com, which is our retreat site. But then that will soon morph over into our community. So there's an online community with an app coming out in the next month to support people who are writers or who want to be. I'm so fortunate to be working with Anne Lamott and Julia Cameron and Sark and Alex L., who just wrote the book How We Heal, some of these amazing teachers. So it feels really good to be doing this.
That's awesome. I think such a great resource for people. So many great resources for people: the journaling prompts, the retreat, creating a community where people can connect and create in community, which you've highlighted that it's really important for the healing process to heal in community. We don't heal in isolation. Isolation is oof, the antithesis, right? Keeps us stuck in our own stuff. um, so yeah,
When I get
great,
isolated, I get more and more crazy.
right?
You
Yeah.
know, I mean, no, it's just, yeah, inside of my bubble. If I don't get out of that, and Raina, I also want to just say I so appreciate the attention and the highlighting of my work, but I would love to just put this out there. It's not a decision you have to make now, but I would love to invite you to come and share some things with some of our community at some point. I love art therapy and I love that you're doing it. It's amazing. So we can talk about that at some other time.
Well, thank you. That's so generous and kind. And yeah, I would love to. We'll have to, we'll stay in communication and you let me know.
I really see what you're doing and thank you for doing it.
Well, thank you so much for doing what you're doing and being willing to come on my show. I know my show is really it's small in comparison to some of the other podcasts out there. So I'm grateful that you wanted to come and talk to me and my audience about your work.
Well, I look forward to sharing this with my groups as well. I just feel like we can't have enough of the work you're doing. And honestly, I feel like doing it, you said, a smaller show. I actually prefer working with people who are doing work out on the streets. I think some of the big famous shows are amazing and I would never, disrespect them. And I just love that you're doing the work out there in the trenches, in the fields. I think it's just beautiful. Thank you for that.
Well, thank you. And I'm grateful for your kind words and appreciate you and the work that you're doing. I feel like it takes a village of people to reach everyone that needs to be reached. And, particularly, I really believe that creativity is curative, like you for so
Yeah.
many reasons. And, not everybody needs to go to therapy, but they still need to have that creative experience and to be invited to be creative and let go of that inner critic voice and play and explore. And I think, you know, the more creativity out there, the better the world is going to be for all of us. Thanks so much for listening to the Creative Psychotherapist podcast. I hope that you enjoyed this conversation with Jacob and I. I know I did, and I don't have his books, but I am really excited to get a copy of The Creative Cure and read up on that. I think what he's doing is really wonderful. He may not be a therapist, but the gifts that he's sharing with the world, I think is helping people in the same way that we help people as expressive arts therapists and creative arts therapists, right? And I just I loved his journaling prompts and how relevant they are and how related they are to what we ask people to do when we're providing services. I know that first question, how do I feel right now, is often a check in art exercise that I do in groups just to kind of get us warmed up and see where people are in their bodies and where they're at, what's their energy level at that day. And um, it just helps people to get into a different thinking and feeling place. Um, and I also loved the question of how would I love to feel right now? How would I love to feel right now? I think it's a question we don't often ask ourselves, but if we did, if we asked that of ourselves every day, I think that there's a great potential for helping ourselves to embody that more desired state of being that we're all looking for and that we're helping our clients to find. And yeah. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this conversation, and I look forward to sharing more conversations with you for the rest of the year until December. And if you liked what you heard, please do subscribe. And if you really, really have the time, we would love if you rated, gave us feedback on the show wherever you listen, so that other people can find us and they can benefit from the conversations that we're sharing as well. All right, take care, everyone.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Creative Psychotherapist. If you like what you heard, please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. For show notes, downloads, and additional resources, head over to the website at www.thecreativepsychotherapist.com.